dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yo, what's good, original crew? It's your boy DJ New Kid, your girl.
Sierra Nicole.
Back on the channel, more Mr. Ballen. We got the real story of the Undead Army. Have you ever heard of something like this?
No.
Undead Army? I don't know. We're going to find out today. So with that being said, make sure y'all check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go, man. Hey, keep showing y'all support and love. But also check out them links in the description box. Go to over there to the other platform, other channels.
Please
we might start dropping our reactions on others. Well, not might. We might start dropping more
yeah.
and different content on other platforms. So y'all go check that out, man. But also, or let us know what platform y'all most would be on so we can be able. But if you enjoyed today's video,
lock it in with a thumbs up.
Thank you, man. Or you can lock it in with a super thanks. We appreciate that as well. So with that being said, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's check it out. Let's see what it's about, man.
If there is one war story that everybody needs to hear at least once, it is the crazy story of how this small group of Russian soldiers during World War I defended Osowiec Fortress in Poland. It is both absolutely horrific and utterly inspiring. And I guarantee you it's nothing like any other war story you've ever heard. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house, take all their fresh eggs out of the fridge, hard boil them, and then put them back. Also, please subscribe to our channel.
What's going on, computer? Damn. I'm sorry. Apologize. I know we got elders and grown people. Apologize.
Out of the fridge, hard boil them, and then put them back. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the morning of August 3rd, 1915, during World War I, a 21-year-old Russian soldier named Vladimir Kotlinski looked out from behind the huge stone walls of Osowiec Fortress in Poland. Out in front of him, he saw the same landscape he had been looking at for the last 6 months that he had been stationed at this fortress. It was a big, swampy forest that surrounded them on all sides. Additionally, in this swampy forest around them on all sides were dozens and dozens of trenches. Trenches are long, deep pits that soldiers will dig to both hide inside of when they're being attacked, and then also to launch their own attacks out of from behind their dirt walls. And these trenches that zigged and zagged all around Osowiec Fortress were created by and now occupied by 7,000 German soldiers. And during World War I, the Russians were fighting the Germans. The Germans really wanted to take Osowiec Fortress from the Russians. It was in a great strategic position with a railway passing right through it. There was also a river nearby and a main road, meaning whoever owned this fortress was greatly aided in moving critical wartime supplies and troops in a very hotly contested area. But despite the repeated attempts by these 7,000 Germans to take over Osowiec Fortress over the past 6 months, they had all been repelled by Vladimir and the puny 900-man Russian force inside of the fortress. And so, by that morning, August 3rd, 1915, as Vladimir is looking out from the battlements over the trenches in the marsh down below, it was like both the Russians and the Germans had reached a sort of stalemate, where neither side was trying to attack the other, and neither side was leaving. They were just kind of staying put and doing nothing. In fact, over the last few weeks, there had been so little action from either side that the Russian soldiers inside the fortress got so bored, they began sneaking out the side door of the fortress to try to catch fish with their bare hands in the nearby river. But this morning, as Vladimir stood atop the wall, he noticed something strange happening in one of the trenches that was located closest to the fortress. It was still several hundred feet away, but he could see clearly down into this trench. And what he saw was there was this cluster of high-ranking German officers that were kind of huddled together, and they kept looking down at the ground at something inside of the trench that Vladimir couldn't see, and then they would look up at the sky and kind of wave their hands around, and then they'd look back down at the ground below them. Now, Vladimir had no idea what they were doing. I mean, again, he could not see what they were looking at in the trench, and when he looked up into the sky where they seemed to be looking, it just looked like a regular blue sky. But whatever they were doing, it was making Vladimir feel nervous. Vladimir was a young junior officer, which meant he was in charge of other soldiers, but because he was so new, he lacked experience and credibility, and so really wasn't considered a serious leader within the army. And so Vladimir, as he's watching this strange behavior, was concerned that if he left now and told his superiors that he was worried about the Germans because they were looking at the sky funny and looking at the ground funny, that it would make him look like he was being paranoid and not a good leader. And so ultimately, Vladimir just looked at this cluster inside of the trench and decided, you know what, they're not shooting at us, there's no attack happening, so whatever they're doing, it can't be that big of a deal. And lately, no one's done anything, so why would that change now? And so Vladimir left the walls of Osowiec Fortress and went down below to hang out with his friends. 3 days later, at 4 in the morning, the Russian soldiers who were up along the Osowiec Fortress walls keeping watch that night noticed something strange out in the darkness near where the Germans were. When they looked out, they saw that the dark night air almost looked kind of blurry or wavy, kind of like if you were looking at air coming off of hot pavement on a sunny day, it would look kind of blurry. That's what the night sky looked like to them. But of course, it couldn't be because of heat and sun, because it's the morning, it's cold, it's dark outside. And so as these Russians are looking out, not sure what to make of this blurry air, they began calling up more Russians to go have a look and figure out what this was. And over the next couple of minutes, as the Russians looked out from behind the walls at this air, they realized what it was. It was this huge grayish-green cloud that was as wide as the fortress was, and the wind was blowing it in their direction.
Stay smart as fuck. That's what I was like. The whole time I'm looking, I'm like, thinking it's like, I'm like, there gotta be some type of chemical. And they were probably working on something this whole time trying. That's smart as fuck. If we can't beat, like, you know what I'm saying? Get a chemical to come in and, like, knock out, you know what I'm saying? So, that's smart, though.
It was as wide as the fortress was, and the wind was blowing it in their direction. Now, the Russian soldiers had no idea what this was, and so they just kind of stood there watching it in stunned silence. And as they watched, they saw as the cloud would touch any vegetation like leaves on trees or the high grass in the marsh, it would all turn black and shrivel up. And then the soldiers began hearing a soft thump, 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 thump out in the darkness. And it was the sound of birds dying and falling to the ground that were inside of this cloud. At this point, the Russians began to panic, and they began to run to sound the alarm to get the other soldiers up to prepare for an attack. But as they did, they began to smell this very harsh chemical smell coming into the fortress, and then before long, all the Russians could hear was the sound of their comrades coughing. It would turn out that strange behavior that Vladimir saw 3 days earlier of the German officers huddled together looking at the sky and then looking down at the ground and then back at the sky again, what they were doing was preparing for a chemical attack on Osowiec Fortress. On the ground, out of sight of Vladimir, were canisters containing the poisonous gas, and when the officers would look up and put their hands up, they were gauging if the wind was strong enough and in the right direction to launch the attack. Now, 3 days ago, the wind had not been in their favor, but this morning at 4 a.m. on August 6th, 1915, the wind had been in their favor, and they had released the gas. And this gas was quite possibly the worst gas you could ever come up against on the battlefield. It was a combination of chlorine gas and bromine gas. On their own, chlorine and bromine are very toxic and can kill you. But when you mix those two gases, it becomes exponentially more dangerous. The gas mixture binds to moisture and then turns the moisture into hydrochloric acid. Meaning, if a person who did not have a gas mask on came in contact with this poisonous gas, When they inhaled it, it would literally fill their lungs with acid, which would dissolve them from the inside out. And then also, the gas would get into their eyes and into their nose, and the acid there would burrow holes into their skull. And once you've come in contact with this gas, there's nothing anybody can do to save you. You're gonna die, except it's gonna take a really, really long time. You don't just immediately dissolve. It's this long, drawn-out, excruciatingly painful process. By this point,
I would never want to. I wouldn't wish that on my worst
stomach
enemy,
is
bro.
turning. Yeah.
You know
So
how
I'm just like visualizing it. Like I'm just.
visualizing how people were just going through it. And then the birds getting affected by it, the wildlife, everything like that didn't ask to be, you know what I'm saying?
This long, drawn-out, excruciatingly painful process. By this point in World War I, chemical warfare was really not being used by anybody, and so as a result, the Russian army did not outfit their soldiers with gas masks. The German army did, and they knew the Russian army did not. So, as this horrific poisonous gas began permeating every square inch of Osowiec fortress, all of these Russian soldiers had nothing they could do to protect themselves from this gas. And so right away, soldiers began bleeding from their eyes and their mouths and their ears, and they literally began coughing up chunks of their lung. And so very quickly, the Russians inside the fortress understood they were being poisoned. And so these soldiers that were not as affected, at least not right away, by this gas, quickly began ripping off their shirts, dunking them in water, and wrapping them around their heads to try to limit how much they breathed in of this chemical. But it really didn't do much to stop the chemical. In fact, these makeshift gas masks might have made it worse because the gas would have bound to the moisture on the shirt. And so the Russians were totally doomed. They were surrounded on all sides outside the walls by their enemy, and then inside the fortress was this gas, and there was no ventilation in the fortress, and so there was nowhere to go. They couldn't escape death no matter where they went. And so Vladimir, he was one of the guys that was still on his feet inside of the fortress, and he stumbled over to this narrow window on the side of the fortress walls, and he looked out and he saw all these Germans running towards them, firing their machine guns, artillery's being fired. I mean, he knows they are moments away from the Germans reaching the fortress door, coming inside, and killing every last one of them. But Vladimir's reaction to this was not being scared or being sad. Instead, he suddenly felt incredibly motivated. If they're going to come in here and kill us, then we're going to make it as hard as humanly possible first. Vladimir had a reputation for being totally fearless. Over the past 6 months that they had been under siege from the German army out in their trenches, anytime fighting broke out, Vladimir was always the first to run up and be right on the front line of fighting, and then several times when his comrades had been shot or wounded, Vladimir would run out into the line of fire to save the fallen soldiers. It was like Vladimir lacked any instinct for self-preservation. And so as the Germans continued their run towards the fortress, artillery shells are hitting the walls, there's constant gunfire, and Vladimir, he leaves his window and he marches back over to the open courtyard inside of this fortress where the 100 or so other still living Russian soldiers were. I mean, they're all gonna die. They've been totally poisoned by this gas, and it's just a matter of time now, but they're still on their feet, and Vladimir walks over to them, and even though, again, he's pretty junior, he stands up and he says to them, "This is our moment. We are all going to die. But what we do right now will define us." And the way Vladimir said it, he got those 100 soldiers who were on death's door to be so motivated so quickly that they rallied to him. And so as these men are literally bleeding out of their eyes, their mouths, they're coughing up pieces of their lung, Vladimir explained the plan. And then moments later, with Vladimir in the front, this gaggle of soon-to-die Russian soldiers charged towards the gates, opened the fortress, and began running out towards the Germans, screaming with their bayonets lowered. Now, the Germans on the outside fully expected that this chemical attack would kill all of the Russians, that taking Osowiec fortress would be super routine because when they walked in, everybody would be dead. And so suddenly to have the fortress open and have these men that are covered in bloody rags and they're puking up pieces of their organs and they're stumbling forward like zombies with bayonets out, screaming like banshees, it scared the living out of the Germans. In fact, they were
I ain't never heard Ballen do this.
Yeah.
He had to bleep it, bro. I ain't never heard. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, they badass, so I give it to them. You know what I'm saying? If I'm gonna die, I'm gonna go
Baby,
down.
I'm going out
Fighting. I'm not finna just be a sitting duck and just let y'all come in and quack.
Yeah.
I feel them though.
and they're stumbling forward like zombies with bayonets out, screaming like banshees. It scared the living out of the Germans. In fact, they were so quickly terrified by what they saw, they literally dropped their guns, turned, and began running back towards their trenches. And as they did, Vladimir and his dead man army began picking off the Germans one by one. And then after Vladimir and the dead man army ran out of ammunition, they just continued staggering forward directly into the thousands of Germans in front of them and began picking up dead German weapons and firing them. And then when they got up to the trenches where these retreating Germans had been so scared they had run into their own barbed wire, and so there's all these retreating Germans stuck on the barbed wire, the Russians just began bayoneting all these men that were stuck. And so at some point, as Vladimir is doing this, a German soldier ran up to him and bayoneted Vladimir right in the stomach. He ran him all the way through until the barrel of the gun was right up against his stomach. And Vladimir apparently looked down at this bayonet, knew he had been completely run through, and he looked up at the German who had just stabbed him, who was still holding the gun, and Vladimir spit blood and lung tissue all over this German's face, and then just began screaming directly at this guy. And so the German was so scared, he just dropped the gun, turned, tried to run, and then Vladimir was back on his gun with the bayonet still in his stomach, shooting at the Germans. The Germans were so completely caught off guard and terrified by Vladimir's dead man army counterattack that even though they outnumbered the Russians 70-1, they failed to take Osowiec fortress. The main reason for that was the Germans who had escaped the counterattack and made it back to their trenches. They told the other German soldiers that the Russians had turned into zombies, literally, that they were undead, and so attacking them was pointless. They're already dead. And the Germans were so scared, they refused to leave their trenches again. Once the Russians could tell they had successfully forced a retreat by the German army, Vladimir, who was still alive at this point with a gun still stuck in his gut from the bayonet, he called out to the rest of his soldiers to retreat back to the fortress. And so this handful of Russian soldiers who were about to die, they hobbled their way back inside of their fortress, and then Vladimir gave his final command. Destroy the fortress. If we can't have it, nobody can. Every single Russian soldier that came in contact with that poisonous gas died, including Vladimir. When the Germans did eventually take Osowiec fortress at a later date, when again, all of the Russians were dead, when the Germans went inside, they realized the fortress had been destroyed and it was no longer strategically valuable. Vladimir would be awarded posthumously Russia's highest military honor. His actions and the actions of the other dying soldiers that fought alongside him are remembered today in stories, songs, and statues all across Russia.
Wow.
This was a mind-blowing. That was a wild story.
That was crazy.
Mind-blowing. Never expected it.
That was crazy.
I ain't gonna lie, that was some badass. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, at the end of the day, if you gonna go out and you can tell, but you still got a fighting chance, you might as well fight.
Maybe.
Don't
and
give
with every
in.
little piece of strength, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because that's what they want you to do. They want you to give up. They want you to retreat. They want you to fall back. They want you to basically hand it over to them.
Yeah.
And
then with them going back and telling like the rest of the people like they're zombies, like this should have killed them, but they turned into zombies.
Especially the
like,
time.
You like, hey, y'all gonna be scared
They
they
ain't
go
going
back.
back.
Zombies, honey, we don't stand a chance. Cause like no, baby, that would have been
then, bro. Then the
play with
fact
those zombies.
y'all can't. Then when y'all came back, we destroyed everything y'all want. So y'all can't even get what you want.
Yep.
So it's like pointless.
Yep, it was like
everybody
so
died
point?
for no reason.
What was the
bro.
point? You know what I'm saying?
Like that's,
But,
but that's smart. It was,
yeah.
It was a smart battle on both ends.
Yeah.
Because for one, how the attack happened, y'all knew they wasn't prepared for it,
That
which
was
is smart. Which is smart, but was messed up. But also, this shows a lot of courage on the other side to not just go down and lay down.
And,
it's like, hey, we gonna die,
and we're still standing right now. Let's
fight.
do what we.
I don't know, man. You
Woo!
gotta give Vladimir his credit. You gotta get a German state credit. You gotta get both.
That's crazy, though.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And just imagine like the wars and stuff, and like people don't really like the amount of stories people would have been able to tell from World War I and World War II. Were way like more crazy than the wars now. You know what I'm saying? Because I think technology and the weaponry is so much advanced now compared to back then. They literally had to fight hand-to-hand combat. You know what I'm saying? Like but 9 times out of 10, some point you're gonna have to do that now. But it's like then it was like, you know,
I get what you're saying.
I'm mind blown though, cause ain't no way in hell I ain't gonna hold you. That ain't the life I'm trying to live.
That ain't for me.
Nah, it ain't for me.
Dog.
So salute to those who do go to the military and put their life on the line for real,
salute
bro.
To y'all.
Hey, that's one courage of a job. And then, bro, the bayonet and you.
And then you go back and give a speech before or get you know what I'm saying? That's crazy.
Then go, like you said, go back and give a speech.
And then give orders. Okay, this is what we about to do.
But my thing is, somebody had to survive to be able to tell everything that happened and the way it happened.
Yeah.
Somebody had to survive.
Yeah.
To be able to, because none of the information we would not know if everybody died, nobody was able to get the information. You know what I'm saying? Somebody had to be able to go back and court, because you got to think about the times.
Yeah.
This information was passed down by word of mouth. Yeah. Especially during combat. So somebody had to survive some type of way.
Or just with, I guess, yeah.
And it ain't you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
I don't know. That's crazy.
That's a crazy story, yeah.
But hey, with that being said, y'all spam us up. Y'all let us know y'all thoughts and opinions in the comments. This was further short. Yeah. This is a short one, man. So hey, we were requested to do it a couple times. So hey, here y'all go. This is predominantly a short one though. But as always, y'all know how it goes. I'm like, I can't even get out myself.
You still thinking about it?
Yeah, that shit is crazy.
Oh, okay.
But as always, I do go by the name DJ McKinney. This is
here to go.
We are.
Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack and flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money low, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.